Welcome to the English Epics channel. I thought she was smarter, but good. My voice remained calm. Brenda raised her voice. Good. Did you hear what I said? Yes, dear. You have a date with a man this Friday, and you don't mind? Her surprise was impossible to miss. Of course I mind, but what choice do I have? As you've noticed, I don't control you. You're your own person. Your voice and expression tell me that you're determined to see this through. So what choice do I have? I'll be back. Don't let your fragile male ego get in your way. I love you. And I'll make amends, you'll see. So you know it's wrong then. And again, I kept my voice steady and calm. What do you mean? I never said anything like that. I've earned this date. Will our parents, yours and mine, agree with you? Brenda lowered her eyes and didn't answer. A clear hint that I let this moment linger in her consciousness. It wasn't visible, but I knew it was still there within her. You know, and I know that they won't understand this. You know you're doing something wrong? You just said it. What? When? Why did you say you would make amends in front of me? If it was lunch with friends, you wouldn't have to make amends in front of me, or if you were going to get a haircut. You only said it because you know you're doing something wrong. And you know it makes you a bad person. Uncertainty crept into her voice. But you said I could do it. No. I never said that, and I never will. All I admitted was that I can't stop you. I absolutely do not approve of it in any way. I would like you to stay with me or go on a date with me. We can go to the same restaurant and then to the same dance club. But it's not about the food or the dancing, is it? It's about the company you prefer. And that company is not me. You want to hear his name, am I right? Again, she lowered her head, and there was silence. By the way, what's his name? It doesn't matter. Let's assume that. I'm not going to argue about that. Whether you like the name Mr. Dickhead doesn't matter. Just know this. I don't want you to go out with Mr. Dickhead, and your date with him on Friday will have consequences. What consequences? You're not just beautiful, you're also intelligent. I constantly tell you these two things. Apparently, you think I say it only because I have to. That's not the case. I say it because I mean it. I'm giving you, an intelligent woman, the responsibility of dealing with the consequences of your Friday date with Mr. Dickhead. You're bluffing. You love me. You always give me what I want. Well, I want this. And as I've already said, I'll be back, and we'll love each other and rebuild together. I can't stop you from doing stupid things. But you've been warned. You're on your own. That I stood up, grabbed my keys, and left before she could say anything else. The temperature in the apartment had been relatively cool all week. On Thursday evening, I packed my things and moved into the guest room. What are you doing, Rick? Pausing with a stack of clothes, I looked at her as if she were a 2-year-old. It seems I overestimated your intelligence. What does it look like? Are you moving out? Yes. My wife wants to date other men. Do you think I'm going to sleep in the same room with a cheating wife? Dream on. Her voice sounded like that of a 5-year-old, taunting. You're such a silly boy. Throwing a tantrum like your little figure is going to lose shape. Without saying a word, I took the stack of clothes, hung them in the spare closet, and returned for another load. So now you're trying to punish. The bigger evil witch with silence, she sneered. You see how pathetic you are. Consequences, was my only response. She won't be able to say she wasn't warned. On Friday morning, I left early and went to a high-end salon where I got myself a professional modern haircut, shaved meticulously with a sharp razor, and even did my nails. In the men's clothing store next door, I bought a casual yet elegant shirt, trousers, and a blazer. I considered getting new shoes, but decided that new footwear and dancing didn't go together, so I passed on that. On the way back home, I stopped by a car wash and requested a thorough cleaning. My SUV had no idea what hit it. Back home, I took a breath, and when I heard Brenda had arrived and took her breath as well, I headed downstairs and waited. Half an hour later, She descended in a new dress I had never seen before, a few inches above the knee, revealing a generous cleavage. She stopped on the last step and looked at me, as if expecting a compliment. When I remained silent, she looked at me again with widened eyes. "Damn it, you look fabulous. Where are you going?" "Out. What did you think?" Mocking her condescending tone, I continued. "What's a weak, clueless husband supposed to do? Just sit at home, playing with his little kitty, waiting for Her Royal Highness to make an appearance?" Slowly shaking my head, I opened the garage door and continued with a sharp tone. "I thought you were smart. How wrong can one person be?" "Well, I don't want to be late. Charmaine can't stand that." Sitting in my clean SUV, I heard a scream and smiled. Got her. Charmaine and I had an amazing evening at a wine bar, where they served light dinners, and on weekends, a live pianist performed on their small dance floor. We had already discovered at work that conversation flowed easily between us. What's even better, she appreciated my sense of humor. Yes, it's a cliché, but it's true. Nothing warms a guy's heart quite like a woman laughing at his jokes. Dancing together was like having sex with shoes on, but we made it work. We moved in sync, and more than once our gentle touches brushed our necks, cheeks, and lips. Our bodies exuded magic as we held each other close. Nonetheless, we were both aware that I was still married, and we respected that. So, we spent a long, not-too-rushed evening sipping wine, allowing our gazes to playfully flirt with each other while we chatted. Brenda, as I mentioned before, was beautiful and passionate. However, the flip side of passion is jealousy, and I was almost certain that the thought of me dancing with Miss D.D. Charmaine would drive her crazy and disrupt the wonderful time she expected to have with her new and eager Mr. Dickhead. When I dropped Charmaine off at her apartment, she did me a favor by applying a drop of her perfume to my shirt collar and smudging her freshly painted lips on the collar, neck, and cheek of my shirt. After a kiss on the cheek, she wished me a good night. "Go and get her, Tiger." We chuckled. I got into my SUV and headed home that IT was barely 10 when I entered that big chill. "Where the hell have you been?" "Not your business," I replied nonchalantly. "You never said where you were going with your anonymous Mr. Dickhead. I would have asked you if he used condoms, but I no longer care, considering that you will rot from the inside out because I will never touch your wretched, cheating body again. So it doesn't matter to me where you went or what you did. I had a fantastic time, and I'm very grateful to you for that. What's this gratitude for? Don't you understand? If that ridiculous idea to break up our marriage hadn't crossed your mind, I would never have had the chance to get to know Charmaine better. What a woman. Hot. Very hot. So, thank you, my dear." "Damn it!" Brenda screamed at the top of her lungs, making me wonder if the neighbors would call the police. "You know I hate this game." "Well, how do you think? Why was she the first person I called?" Stunned, she stared at me. What? What did you say?" And again, it seems I overestimated your intelligence. Take a second, it's not rocket science. You're trying to reject me and push me into this nonsense, dressing up for some anonymous jerk, wearing clothes you've never worn for me, and you're surprised when I follow your example. You've redefined the terms of our marriage despite my objections, and I just did the same thing you did. The only difference is that I was honest enough to tell you who I went with. For some strange reason, you're too embarrassed to name your partners. So, Miss Very Smart, what's your problem?" Brenda's. Sails deflated before my eyes, and 2 tears rolled down her cheeks. Without giving her a chance to catch her breath, I continued. "So, let me guess. Kevin South didn't get your kitty tonight as he hoped." Another scream, this time filled with pomposity, filled the air, accompanied by hands covering the mouth. "How did you find out?" In the tone of a game show host, I sang, and once again, the inadequacy of your mind is fully on display. Just think for a moment. You work in an office with at least 10 other women. Kevin is the biggest pussy enthusiast anyone's ever seen. Everyone there knows who's sleeping with whom, and they talk about it. You used to do it too. So did you even for a second think you'd be an exception? For over a month now, several of your so-called friends have been telling me how you not only fell for Kevin's bullshit, but started looking for it. As one of your colleagues put it. Who knows? Maybe he dumped her for you. There's no fury in hell and all that. According to the gossip, tonight he was planning to make you his. He even had a room at the Marriott. Apparently he spends the first night at the Marriott. After that, it's Motel 6 or a woman's house. Didn't you know this? Her big eyes told me she was shocked to be portrayed as ignorant, gullible, and such an easy catch. She burst into tears. Oh, Rick, I'm sorry. You're right, I'm such a fool. How can you put up with being married to such a dumb bitch like me? Oh, Brenda, good news. I don't have to continue this. I don't need to stay married to your dumb, stinking ass. You'll be serviced tomorrow after breakfast. We rented this house, and we have 3 more months. So you can extend the lease or use this time to find what you like better. Where will you go? She asked in a quiet voice. Charmaine said I could stay with her until I figure something out. She has a second bedroom she uses as an office. As soon as I file, she said we can discuss the terms. When I told her I'm filing tomorrow, she outlined these conditions. Good ones. Can't wait to look into them further. Everything else we have. Together we'll just split down the middle. Now you can fuck whoever you want, and you won't have to put up with a weak-ass husband's shit. I hope Kevin is worth it. I met some other husbands who had fallen victim to Kevin, also known as Mr. De Chicanos. One evening after dinner, he discovered that his car had been vandalized, windows smashed, paint scratched, baby poop on all the seats, wheels stolen, and I forgot what else. While he was inspecting the damage, 3 masked assailants, all dressed in black, robbed him without a word and beat him severely. The police were puzzled as to why the robbers, who were after his wallet and fake Rolexes, ground his family heirlooms into dust, but with no witnesses and the parking lot cameras smeared with paint, they had nothing to go on. At that time, 4 spouses of his victims were playing poker at one of their houses. After he recovered, he moved out of state. No one knows or cares where exactly Brenda moved out, found an apartment, but when she realized that I was happily attached to Charmaine, she left the state as well. I never saw her again. I stayed with Charmaine for a while, but we mutually agreed that a fling doesn't necessarily lead to long-term compatibility, so I moved out and found a townhouse close to work. Growing older, wiser, and fitter, I developed a strong connection with a fellow gym-goer. One thing led to another, as it often does in such moments, and I found happiness with a woman who had real brains in her head and devotion in her heart. Story 2. On Friday evening, I drove Julia to the rugby club for a bachelorette party. She looked very elegant. She was wearing beautiful trousers and a blouse. I think she chose that outfit because deep down she knew I still had some lingering trust issues. I really do trust her after everything that happened, but there's a tiny, almost insignificant doubt that she tried to ease. She told me she didn't expect to be late, but if I were busy, either Anne or Jane's husband could give her a ride home. I told her it was fine, and that if someone decided to head home earlier and she wanted, they could drop her off. I tried to show a little bit of the trust one genuinely feel, but I let her know I preferred to pick her up myself. A couple of weeks ago, I did some work at the rugby club and wanted to talk to Jeff, who managed the club, to make sure everything was going well. Anne, her colleague from the office, had a niece, Kelsey, who was marrying her longtime boyfriend, Graham. They had been living together for the past 6 months or so. He was one of the younger guys working at the factory in the company. Graham was a good guy, hard-working, fairly intelligent, and exactly the kind of man we should appreciate and stick with. I had been planning to try to recruit him for the service team. He was a skilled machine operator and seemed to understand how the equipment worked. Kelsey and Graham are getting married next Saturday. Tomorrow evening, Graham is hosting his bachelor party at the rugby club. I'd been invited along with most of the factory employees, even Philip Barstow, the boss's son. I got a call at around 9:30. A bit earlier than I had expected. Julia asked if I could give Anne and Jane a ride home because they weren't too keen on staying longer. Things were getting a bit out of hand with the younger crowd. I got there pretty quickly and went inside to pick them up. When I got there, Jeff told me they were in the storage room, a large space in that part of the club they rented out for weddings, funerals, and any other events requiring a big venue with a bar. For some reason, it was known as the banquet hall. The bachelorette party had booked that banquet hall, and everything seemed to be going well. I asked Jeff about the work I had done for him and whether there were any issues with it. He said everything seemed to be working fine. However, he hadn't checked anything and just gave me a strange look, even though he didn't seem to have a reason to. It was around that time the ladies came out of the reception hall. Julia walked over to me and gave me a kiss. And then Jane smiled and thanked me for agreeing to give them a ride home. I asked them, "What's going on in there?" "Lots of drinking and that sort of thing. They've got a few strippers, and that's not really my thing." And said, Jane added, "Nothing has happened yet, but I don't think some of the things they're joking about would pass the husband or boyfriend test. I was planning to have a beer and chat with Jeff about the work again, but the girls seemed eager to get home. As we were leaving, Adam's girlfriend, Dawn, ran over and asked if we could give her a ride home as well. She looked a bit flushed and was very quiet as she sat in the back seat of the car. On Saturday evening, there was a line of men at the banquet hall. In reality, everything was quite civilized, just men drinking beer, chatting nonsense, and playing snooker. Among them were Graham's future father-in-law, Kelsey's brother, Harry, and most of the factory staff, including John, Adam, and Chris from my team. These three had recently left my team to take sales positions after their predecessors quit in a hurry. It was nice to gather together in a friendly atmosphere. However, things got a little strange when Adam found me and said he had discovered a pair of women's underwear stuffed behind one of the seat backs. I was honestly curious what he was doing checking the seat backs in the first place. It didn't matter that several pints had been consumed. I managed to keep that information under wraps and still lost another pound to Chris in snooker. Early in the evening, I tried to talk to Jeff about the work I had done for him. I could see he was busy, but it also seemed like he was avoiding me. "Don't worry about it. I'll talk to him later," I thought to myself. Then around midnight, everything seemed to change. By that time, most of us were already in high spirits, but suddenly Graham dropped out of the game. We just assumed he had too much to drink, so his future father-in-law took him home. We wrapped things up around 1 a.m., but Jeff was still avoiding me. Kelsey wanted to have a rehearsal for the wedding breakfast, like she had seen on TV. Nobody was genuinely interested in it, especially Graham. Only Kelsey's father seemed a bit concerned about the expenses, but he said he'd do anything for his princess, and if she wanted a rehearsal, she would have it. Graham didn't agree with it, and that was the end of it. Then suddenly, on Monday, after the bachelor party, Graham changed his mind, saying that it might actually be a good idea to practice, since many people weren't used to standing up and speaking. We agreed, though we couldn't do everything completely because only the main participants were present, parents of the bride and groom, the bridesmaids, and there were quite a few of them, and the best man, John, whose wife, Lisa, was the maid of honor, along with the vicar and the ushers. That's when Adam and I showed up, both with our partners. Kelsey's father had booked the rugby club for 5 p.m. on Friday. At least this saved Julia from having to cook, plus I could have a couple of beers, and we could chat about all sorts of things without bothering anyone over the upcoming wedding. The wedding reception was scheduled to take place in the rugby club's reception hall. So it wasn't hard to arrange the Friday evening gathering and ensure that most of us attended. For the club, it might have been a bit exciting, but they were used to this kind of event. Graham seemed a bit subdued throughout the week, likely due to pre-wedding nerves. I tried to find Jeff again on Friday, but he wasn't around. It was his day off before the big day tomorrow. After the meal, Graham stood up and shared a few thoughts about what they expected to happen the next day. He said he just wanted to practice standing up and speaking in front of people. The best man, John, stood up next and mumbled a few words, saying he would save his speech for tomorrow. He didn't want to give anything away, and he didn't have too many jokes he could afford to waste tonight. Graham's father-in-law then stood up, welcomed him into the family, and laughed as he said, "Everything tomorrow." Then Graham asked if Kelsey wanted to say a few words, but she declined. That's when it all began. "Well, I have a few words to say," Graham said. "I've been thinking a lot about what to say at this rehearsal, and I wanted to save my real speech for tomorrow. However, I thought I should ask a few questions." His voice sounded very confident, as if he had rehearsed it and didn't need any practice. "What would my dear future wife say if I had a great time with a stripper at my bachelor party?" The room erupted in noise, but Graham raised his hands in the air and smiled. "Don't worry, I didn't. My future father-in-law can confirm that because he beat me by 5 pounds in snooker, and I fully intend to win it back in the," Graham continued, "marriage. Looking around, I see that marriages are built on love, trust, understanding, and communication. And I see a lot of that around this table. I'm glad you're all here. I'd like to ask all the men who think they are married to an amazing, lovely woman they want to spend the rest of their life with to stand up." All the men stood up as expected, but I was curious where this was going. Julia glanced up at me and smiled, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. "Gentlemen, please, take your seats," Graham continued. The men sat down. "Ladies, stand up if you are married to a man you love and want to spend the rest of your days with." All the married women stood up, but there were a few nervous glances among them. Many women with partners also stood, but there was an odd undertone to it all. I felt that something was going to happen, and it was only a matter of time. Looking at Lisa, who stood next to her husband John, the best man, Graham said, "If you love your husband, why did you do that to him?" A large flat-screen TV at the end of the room came to life, displaying a photo of Lisa on all fours with a man behind her, though the man's face was not visible. The photo was cropped, but it was obvious that Lisa was having sex. The room erupted in noise. Graham raised his voice to overpower the commotion. "I don't see any means of protection, so I hope you didn't have sex with her last week. You never know what you could get infected with." Lisa let out a cry, covered her face with her hands, and ran out. John followed her, shouting something, but we couldn't make out exactly what. It might have been the word adulterous. Graham raised his hands. "Right now, we can't continue like this. Please sit down and remain calm." It seemed to me that Graham was remarkably calm. I thought this wasn't the end of it and quickly glanced around the room, as did many others. I think some people wanted to leave, but others had an unhealthy curiosity about where this was all heading. And some were wondering just how far things would go. I didn't know Graham very well, but I had a feeling we were about to find out. Eventually, everything settled down, and concerned murmurs could be heard around the table. Julia was holding my hand tightly. Graham continued, "I have a question for you. Now, if you were John, what would you do with Lisa? Would you forgive her? If he does forgive her, would you consider him weak? If he divorced her, would you think he was too harsh over one night? What are your thoughts on this?" There was silence for a moment. Graham let it linger, and then guilt seemed to take over. One of the other bridesmaids, Hillary, stood up and said, "I would forgive her. It was a mistake, a one-time foolish mistake. Forgiving her would be a loving, kind, and generous act." Graham looked at Hillary and said, "You say that because you're hoping your husband would be loving, kind, and generous to you for the same reason." The screen changed to show a photo of her with another man, who wasn't white. 2 more people stormed out, shouting loudly. Graham continued once the commotion had settled down and everyone was curious about what he was going to say next. What would happen now? Some people wanted to leave, mostly the women, but it was clear that many were intrigued, especially the husbands of the women who wanted to leave. How far was this going to go? Graham looked at Kelsey and said, "Do you have anything you'd like to tell me?" She looked shocked and frightened, though that could have been because her 2 best friends had just left in a rather unpleasant manner. She simply shook her head. Graham continued, "Let's call a truce here. And now, I'm suggesting that if anyone did something wrong or something they're not proud of at the bachelorette party, and if they confess to it, then maybe the wedding can still take place tomorrow. But we might need to find a new maid of honor, and I'll have to find a new best man. I'll give everyone 1 minute, Graham said as he sat down, placed his wrist on the table, and glanced at his watch. Silence filled the room. I saw Dawn lean over to Adam and whisper something in his ear. He smiled, nodded, and the two of them stood up to leave. "Why are you leaving so soon? Do you have something to be ashamed of?" Graham called out. Dawn turned around, looked directly at Graham, and said no, unlike some people. A stunned silence fell over the room as Adam and Dawn walked out hand in hand. Graham stood up. "Most of you think the cameras in the rugby club are fake or don't work, but they're not. All of them are functional, modern, and high resolution. My boss, Alan, fixed them 4 weeks ago. I have copies of everything that happened in that room on Thursday night. I'll extend the truce by another 15 seconds. Another woman stood up and prepared to leave with her husband following her. After that, no one else moved. Graham picked up the remote control from where he had placed it. "Last chance," he said. He waited for about 5 seconds before pointing the remote at the TV. Oh, and by the way, the outdoor cameras work too. The video started playing a clip from outside. It showed Kelsey running across the parking lot toward a large camper van and getting inside with a black man. Julia leaned toward me and whispered, "That's one of the strippers." I had already figured that out myself. Graham quickly fast-forwarded the footage, making the rocking van look even worse. He then slowed it back to normal speed, just in time to show Kelsey stepping out of the van. She headed back toward the club, but she seemed unable to walk straight. Graham looked down at Kelsey, who was in tears, but I don't think his words were meant for her alone. "It's probably a good thing you said it hurt too much to have sex with me, because I bet you didn't use protection either." Then, the TV began displaying screenshots from Kelsey's phone, showing photos she, Lisa, and other women had taken during the bachelorette party. "How was your first time with a black man? Looking forward to doing it again." "No, once was enough. But it was so good. Good job. Everyone swore to keep it a secret, but this could cause trouble if it ever comes out. Don't worry, he'll never find out. And in a couple of years, you can do it again. Maybe with someone else from the hen house." "Yeah, that could be fun. Then that's something to look forward to in the future." "Definitely good. But right now I'm having trouble walking. After this, Graham's getting nothing until the wedding night." "Damn, girl. 2 at once. I've only seen that in adult movies." Graham turned to the vicar. "Looks like the wedding's off." Graham walked out, and as he passed his almost in-laws, I heard him say, "I'm sorry." They just sat there, stunned. Graham had shown us part of the recording, but there was clearly more than what he had just revealed. I have a feeling divorce lawyers and marriage counselors in the area are about to be very busy. Kelsey sat at the head of the table, completely alone and in tears. Julia held my hand tightly and we left for home. Our local newspaper later reported that the police and fire department had been called to an incident that began as an attempted theft of a camper van, escalated into a robbery. It was reported that both victims were adult entertainers. The police stated that it appeared to be a camper van theft gone wrong when the owner and his friend interrupted the thieves. During the scuffle, something must have gone awry because the van caught fire. The newspaper speculated, but this was not confirmed by the police or hospital, that the beating the victim suffered seemed to have a revenge element, as both sustained significant injuries to the groin area. It couldn't have been Graham or Adam, because both of them were working for me the day it happened.